Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of the Kubernetes 1.26 release retro. My name is Jeremy. I'm going to be the facilitator today. I think James is going to take notes, but I'll also help take notes so James can feel free to jump in on any conversations since he's going to be the EA for the 127 release. Looks like we've got a pretty good set of things to go through for almost all of the categories. So we'll try to time box things just to make sure that we have enough time to discuss things. And if we need to, we will have part 3 of this tomorrow. Hopefully we can get through things today, so give people some time back. But if not, then we will go through things. Just a quick reminder before we get going, this meeting is covered by the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, or the CNCF Code of Conduct. So please be mindful of the things you say. And this meeting is being recorded, so it will be uploaded to YouTube at some point today. All right, this meeting should be respectful. We should focus on solutions in our communications. This isn't a place for blaming. It's about trying to find things we can do better next time, and recognizing the great things that happened during 126. So with that started, we will kick off with what went well. And it looks like there's 2 things that weren't covered in the previous retro. Fred from Comms and Leo. Fred, do you want to go first?
Yes, sure. So this is actually linked with the previous point around boards, which I think influenced the result here for the feature blocks. But I think that this ability to have a cross view of the enhancements and how they relate with the opt-in feature blocks and how the feature blocks then relate with the publishing publication dates, etc., really helps in the situation that we're in right now. I think that the feature blocks part went well because we have almost everything merged at the moment for the feature block series, which is composed of 16 different feature blocks running through January. So I think that for the next release, for example, this can mean that we can compress even more the blog release cycle, for example, if the team wants it. So that's just a note on the, I think, indirect results of using the feature block, the feature board. Sorry.
Awesome. Any follow-ups to that one? Any other related boards or awesome comments? All right. Thanks for that one. Leo, looks like you want to piggyback on blogs.
Right. Yeah, this is just a quote from Slack. So Tim Bannister wrote in release comms that this release was by far the slickest release from the blog side of things. So I just want to echo that.
Awesome. It's great to hear all those shout outs around the blogs. I think those always seem like they are hard to get folks to commit to and get through. So it's great to see the progress there. All right. Any other things that folks would like to add or acknowledge about what went well in 126? All right, let's jump into what could have gone better in 126. And it looks like we left off with one from Divya. I don't know if Divya is on the call. But I'll go ahead and it looks like we have a few from Divya all on behalf of SIGDocs. I see a SIGDocs Zoom account on the call. Does the SIGDocs want to jump in and mention anything about these?
I think that's actually me, but it's
okay.
from a previous login.
Yeah.
But I was out sick for a good portion of the last half of the release cycle, so I'm not too familiar with this. I haven't caught up with my Slack messages.
Okay.
Yet.
Yeah, no worries. Let's just walk through them. The first one is the PR for the API deprecation page was delayed. And the questions are who should do it, when should it be done by? There are currently no timelines or deadlines set around this, and who will ensure it's done by the deadline?
So historically, various folks have updated this API deprecation page. I've seen Jordan Liggett's created this PR. Jordan's done a lot of work for this API deprecation page, including creating it. I've added a few entries as well. And it should be done by the enhancement owner or the folks working on the enhancement that might be deprecating an API, or that's part of the release. That's just my opinion. We should clarify it more in the docs handbook about this page. It's just like the feature gates page that the enhancement owners or folks working on the enhancements should also update the feature gates page, and we should add this in there as well.
Do we have anybody from the docs? Oh, Mark, go ahead. You have your hand up.
I was just going to ask, is this something that we should add another column to the enhancements board for? Like, is there any API deprecations as part of this? Maybe to remember and aggregate it?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And it's that we should add that as a column if there's any, this is also, that would also be useful for the API, for the deprecations blog as well, that comes in mid-cycle.
So it sounds like maybe two actions out of that one. One, we should update the docs handbook to be a little bit more crisp on the responsibility and the actions to take there. But two, it sounds like maybe we should also update the enhancements tracking board. Does anybody want to be the owner for those?
I can add a column to the board.
Okay, that'd be super awesome. Anybody from the docs team want to take the handbook update?
I'll give you the handbook update.
All right, thank you, SigDocs. Grace, you have your hand up.
Yeah, instead of adding a column, is it possible, what if we change the status column to add one like more field? So we have like graduating, net new, major change and deprecation, maybe like API deprecation can be one of that instead of an entire column, because I'm aware that like the board is getting very big very fast.
Yeah, sometimes I think that, like, especially as going to stable, they can deprecate alpha APIs. So sometimes those are mutually exclusive, or like you can be graduating part of the API and deprecating other parts of the API. But I think maybe we can have a follow-up discussion on Slack about that, and maybe get some of the API folks too about the best way to track that. That is a good point, though. There is a lot of columns on the board.
Okay, so going back a little bit, is it better to have an offline discussion about whether it's better to add a column or update the existing statuses, or do we just want to focus on having the updated statuses instead of the column?
Let's do a quick offline discussion.
Okay.
Sounds
like a good idea. All right. Any more discussion on that one before we move on? Okay, cool. Next one is also from Divya. Currently, the Netlify access is granted to the release team docs lead per the role handbook. The concern is that there are a lot of moving parts within Netlify and a risk associated with delegating the collaborator access. Proposal is the SIG docs tech lead or co-chair helping with the release should be the one creating the new site on Netlify, or this should be extensively documented in the handbook and only the minimum amount of privileges need to be assigned. From the Netlify documentation, this seems to correspond to the collaborator role. We'll need to ascertain the scope, whether it's all sites or only the Kubernetes main. A note needs to be made to document the cleanup of roles after the release is done. All right. I don't know much about the Netlify access. Ray, do you want to? guide us on that one?
Yeah. So in this release, so Netlify was granted access to the docs lead, and you could do many things once you have certain permissions to it. You could take down Kubernetes.io, you could take down Kubernetes 6 doc sites as well. And there's concern that is just too much permission that's granted. And the proposal here is to not have the access granted to the docs to release docs lead, but to have a SIGDocs tech lead or co-chair help with the release. That has happened in the past. I remember when I was docs lead, I did not get Netlify access. I had a docs co-chair help me with creating what's needed in Netlify, which is just the next doc site for if 126 was released. Was the action is to create a release 125 doc site in Netlify. So that's just the background of it. And I believe the other proposal is to have just minimum amount of privileges as assigned to the release docs lead. So there's two options that are proposed. One, having the SIGDocs tech lead or co-chair, helping with the release on release day. But on this case, since the release date changed, there's some conflicts of schedules of that. And also I was out as well for a good portion of the latter half of the release. And also the second proposal is to have more minimal permissions granted to the release docs lead.
So I would suggest to start at least with only delegating or tagging in a docs tech lead. If anyone has been, and I saw Nate maybe went off mute. If anyone has worked on another CNCF project or something, and is familiar with kind of like how Netlify is structured, like if you're on another CNCF project, I effectively have access to delete any CNCF, anything on a Netlify site for CNCF. So I think one, the fact that we've moved to a more scoped Kubernetes specific doc site is a good move. I still think that because of how extensive collaborator access, like the destructive capabilities of collaborator access, I would suggest until there is a well-documented process and a shepherd for the docs lead to feed into SIGDocs, that you keep it pretty locked down.
Yeah, I would second that, and I think that this fits into some of the ongoing discussion of the Netlify cleanup that is already going on, and I would think that this discussion should be pulled out of the release retro and be a part of the of that work. I think that it's its own project. It should Netlify should be cleaned up and permissions for folks removed if not necessary, and get to a baseline where we're comfortable with how Netlify is set up, and then sort of bring that back to the release team and say, okay, here's how we recommend things get built out moving forward.
Yeah, I would flag the specific SIG release need, but I know that there have been a few emails recently about cleaning up Netlify access. So that's, I believe that's already in flight.
Yeah.
All right. Any other comments on this one? Okay, next one also is SIGDocs related. Guidelines around generation and cross-checking of reference documentation in the role handbook needs to be improved. This could include the following points: how to do it, what needs to be checked after generation, where, how does it need to be checked? So is this generally just a handbook update to reflect reality as of 126, 127 later? Any gaps there? Anybody from the docs team have any better kind of clarity on this topic?
There's been, I think Ray and I have had this discussion a couple of times. It, I think, needs to be made easier if we want somebody who is just coming in, who may not have programming sort of or environment setup chops, right? And so we can either make the documentation better, but it's going to be somewhat complex as is, or we could like containerify the whole thing and say, okay, here's the button. But that would take some coding expertise as well. So I'm sort of of two minds on that one. I'm happy to have the process get updated in the documentation to be clearer, but even if it were made clearer, I'm not sure that it would be made any easier necessarily, if you know what I mean. And there's enough moving parts that I think that we should, as a team, go through the process of making it a let's treat it like a project and say, okay, we want to clean up this process so that anybody can do it. And there's a couple ways to do that.
I had my 2 cents. Yeah, so for several releases, we've had issues generating the reference docs. There are instructions. There's a whole there's a page on Kubernetes.io on how to generate the reference docs, but it's not for some time. I don't know when during the release cycle it broke, and only certain folks know how to generate the reference docs. And they both happen to be they both are SIGDoc tech leads. So what in my opinion, we need to extract that information out, document it so that the process does not rely on 2 people. Then eventually, I believe we need to containerize it. There was some efforts from a previous release docs lead to containerize it in the past, but there were some gaps in the knowledge.
So as a follow-up action to this, what specifically do you think that we could do better in 127?
With this, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
With this, one thing that was brought up that I thought would be really helpful is potentially going through kind of like almost like a game day exercise, or really just kind of like, doing a smoke test or just like a dry run through the process prior to the release was one thing that was brought up. And I think that would be helpful, just kind of like go through it, emulate the steps that we need to take either, directly or have like a fake site, develop out those steps. Such that would increase confidence with folks as they go through the steps on the actual release day as one option. I heard that. I really liked that.
I like that idea too. I think the more you can get sorted before the day of, the better off we're all going to be.
Agreed. Not that I advocate like doing your taxes as a dry run before, that's not as fun, but Kubernetes release definitely.
Sounds like a good idea. It looks like people have consensus that it's a good idea. Does somebody want to take an action to plan what that looks like and identify where we want to put this into the handbooks so we make sure that it happens, kind of a script? Or
is this something that would go into the, and maybe there's a question for Ray or any of the other Tech Talks folk on the line. Is this something that we would want to bring up with the Tech Talks team in our bi-weekly meeting and see if we, like I said, I think in order to get this done sort of correctly, we need to elevate this to the level of like a project. I think this is a fairly big thing. And so I think one person opening one issue isn't necessarily going to get it done.
Yeah, definitely agree on that front. Happy to kind of raise this up at the next SIGDocs meeting and then push on it where it makes sense. I think there are a lot of to-dos around updating the release handbook in the context of SIGDocs, and so more than happy to kind of push on that and be listed as the owner for that, at least that umbrella issue for all the things that need to be done. More than happy to help.
Thanks, Taylor.
Absolutely. I'll be playing Umbrella by Rihanna as I do it too. Ella A.
Nice. All right. Any other topics or any actions that we want to record for this one? All right, let's move on to the next one so we can be mindful of time. Again, another SIGDocs one. Tagging release was an area that we mildly struggled with, along with the reference docs generation, possible need for an update of the release team docs role handbook. Does anybody have any more context on this? Specify what we need to specifically update in the handbook so we can assign an action out? Or should we follow up with Divya offline to kind of identify that?
I think this might be about an issue where there are some docs that do target the 126 branch for docs, but it's not related to specific enhancements. I'm not 100% sure on this, but
yeah, and I think some of the terminology in the handbook is it's correct but unclear. And I think that if we did a pass on the handbook to sort of make what is being referred to at any given step during that process more clear, I think that we would be taking a big step to help solve what this is referring to from my recollection of release day.
Okay, so sounds like an action to update the handbook or just make a pass through and review and then identify what needs to be updated there. Ray, you're going to be doing a handbook update from a previous action item. Do you want to look at this as well?
Yep.
Okay. Awesome, thank you. And ping away if you need any other assistance so we can line up somebody to help. All right. Next up, any other comments or actions on that one before we move on? All right, next we have a couple from Fred and the comms team. Do you want to lead the first discussion here, Fred?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just see the agenda. Am I? Yeah, so the first one, maybe it's just me, but I had some issues with this. It's not absolutely clear to me when I started collecting the major themes and the list of mid-cycle deprecations and removals, etc. What exactly was I supposed to be talking about? Because one thing is the enhancements that are tracked, and some of them are marked as removal, as deprecation, etc. And if I only looked into that, we had one removal in this cycle, but in reality, we had like 12 or 13 perhaps, which I only found by other methods. Maybe this is the way to do it, but if it is, it's actually not so well documented. I was always half afraid that I was missing something, to be honest. So it would, if I'm correct in that this removals and deprecations, because the other part, the enhancements, I think it's pretty much one-to-one. So the stuff that gets into the release, it's tracked, it's identified, and when it isn't, it's a problem for everyone. So it's easily added. The removals and deprecations, there are some that I only found out they were being removed or deprecated because they were mentioned, for example, in the major teams discussion. So what am I suggesting? It would be interesting if this kind of information about what is actually going to be removed and deprecated in this release had some, I don't know, tagging or there was some more automated way of like selecting and seeing it, because otherwise one ends up by collecting the API removals, going through GitHub and searching, etc. And this is a bit error prone, I think. This is one. The other is easier. It's essentially about the where am I? Yes, it's about the reg status that comms gives in terms of is everything okay with the feature blocks, for example. Here, there's a problem that I felt is that one can go from red from green to red in one day, because due to the nature of the work in comms, we have deadlines, and 80 to 90% of the submissions get in the last 2 days, including the day of the deadline, because it's seen by most teams as this is the day where I need to submit it. So the risk here is that either comms is always on yellow just to be on the safe side and be able to say something, or it's in green until 1 day before the release, and then suddenly it's red. This is not a huge problem, except when justifying why are you green, why are you red. I think that one possible way around this is to have like a soft deadline and a hard deadline. I'm not sold on this idea myself, because maybe this adds complexity that isn't needed. But anyway, the problem is the one that I've just described. We can live with it, but still, it can be a problem specifically on the last deadline, which is like 1 week away from the release, because we only have 1 week to see if those that missed the publishing deadline are ready or not. And that's it.
Great. Those are both great topics. The first one looks like it's mostly around how do we really track things to identify major themes. I think that's been a topic that always is an issue. How do you classify something as a major theme, and like who really has input for that? I think it's an effort of working with the enhancements team, and I think it's working with the SIG leads to help identify those things. Is this something that you think could be fixed by having another status or something on the tracking board, or is this something that should be a back and forth conversation with everybody? Couple hands up. Leo, you were first. You want to go first?
So as I understood this this topic, it's not so much about the major themes; it's more about the deprecations.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I think the idea is that, no, you said it. I think in your explanation that, for example, one idea would be to add another label, so another label in GitHub, which we can set to the issue or to the cap. That it marks basically this is deprecation, so we can filter it. I think this is like the most straightforward idea. Idea. I don't know if there's like anything else or any other idea how to track it, because yeah. So for example, we had now, I think one cap was marked as a deprecation, and then basically all the other ones were basically just pull requests, and we kind of, I mean, yeah, it was a little bit messy to get this information in. So yeah, something we should improve for sure.
Do you have any concrete suggestions other than a new label on how that could be improved?
There already is a kind deprecation label.
Mhm.
I was just checking that. So maybe we just need to
it's not applied to sex. I don't think it's applied consistently. I ended up doing a free text search on GitHub, and only around 10% of the stuff that ended up in the blog was marked as deprecated. So that would be ideal. Kind deprecation, milestone V126, something like this. This would be trivial. So yeah.
Yeah, and this is exactly the reason that the kind deprecation label was created. So if people are not leveraging it to the point where things are bubbling up as they need to, then we need to, I think part of it needs to be communication about using the label.
Yeah, perhaps I can, or somebody could also check the issue template or the template when you create a PR. Maybe it's not mentioned there, or it would be useful to. Okay, yeah.
And what about removals? Because they get automatically removed one cycle, one release after. That's clear to everyone. So maybe update the handbook or the rule book or something to say search for removals from the previous version and project it into this one. I'm just thinking of how can I update the rule book to actually provide, even if we don't make a lot of changes, if we have information on the rule book, it helps those coming next.
Do we want to try to include reminders or some more communication around using the kind deprecation label as we start off the release to get people to better use it?
I think that would be helpful.
Yes.
Yeah.
If we want, maybe we can include that in the mail that the enhancements team goes out and say, if you're, net new work, here's the enhancements project, removal work, please make sure all PRs are tagged with kind, or PRs or issues are tagged with kind deprecation.
Okay, that sounds like a good action item for the 127 enhancement lead to take.
Which is me. So yep. I'll make sure that gets added to the rule book too, if that's, or the role handbook, if that's what we decide.
Okay, that sounds good. Rodolfo, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, also we can add that suggestion into the GitHub template at creating the issue or the pull request. I think it could be a good reminder.
All right. Any
And
other?
I'll also,
go ahead.
oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead. No,
I'll
go for
say
it.
I'll also remind all of, or like change it so that when we do the SIG outreach for the KEP collection for enhancements, that we also mention that to the SIG leads in Slack too. To please help us collect deprecations and removals.
Yeah, we could also add it to the next chairs and tech leads meeting as just as a quick topic to include. But it's probably not till January, so it'll be aligned really well. Like it'll be fresh in people's heads.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay, I can add that as I'll take an action for that one. All right. Any other discussion on that one before we move on? We've got about 23 minutes left. Cool. So we didn't discuss Fred's second one, which is around soft deadline, hard deadline, rolling window. I think we always have difficulties with people getting things done by, like, especially docs and stuff around deadlines. It's always a hard one. Do we have any suggestions about improving this so that we don't have another what didn't go so well for 127? Grace.
Not related to the doc size of things, just from enhancement. I haven't really seen soft deadlines working. It's just confusing for everyone involved, and it doesn't do what we want it to do.
Agreed. I have said this on a few of these retros. Soft deadlines don't exist at all. And the deadlines that we state are, listen, the release dates are aspirational. The deadlines that we state are true hopes. I think it is very hard to own a date when the deliverables are the responsible parties for the deliverables are not on your team. So I would say anything that exists as a soft deadline today should go away.
I see a +1 from Xander in the chat. And then Ray, oh, and a thumbs up from Nate. And then Ray and Leo have their hands up, and it looks like Ray was first. So go ahead, Ray.
All right. Yeah, I was going to reiterate the there's no such thing as a soft deadline. As far as the docs is concerned, to get the PR placeholder. In the past, what I've noticed when releases go well and getting those placeholder PR deadlines, there's been a lot of communication early on, early and frequent, and that should be done in order to get those any placeholder PRs in. That's it for me.
Right. So for me, I actually like this. The last point in this list is about the docs ready for reviewers deadline, which Ray also mentioned, where we have actually like sort of like a soft deadline. I mean, we don't really enforce it, and it does not work very well. So I think introducing like a soft deadline does not make sense. Yeah, that's it.
So do we want to take an action to scrub all references to soft deadlines and turn them into hard deadlines?
Yeah, so I mean, then it depends how we want to enforce it. So this is like the next question. So probably for comms and docs, it's always like a little bit different. So yeah, probably we need a discussion around this. And yeah.
James, go ahead. Oh, go ahead. Who was gonna speak first?
Sorry. I was just going to ask, with the soft deadlines, does the oh god, the enhancements PRR review deadline, that's kind of like a soft deadline, does that count, or does that not count as a soft deadline for this purpose of this discussion?
I think that one's owned by the PRR team, and they generally are going to review things after the soft deadline if they can. Like, it's going to be up to bandwidth available. I think that it should be treated as a, which my personal opinion, should be treated as a hard deadline too. But Mark, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was gonna say with the soft deadline for the PR or the enhancements soft deadline or the PRR deadline, I never felt like it was very clear, like what state the enhancement needed to be in before the soft deadline and what the repercussions for not being in that state were. So +1 for kind of removing the soft deadlines. Like, I'm not sure if it means that, you know, all of the participating, the CAP approvers need to be signed off by it, or if it just needs to be in a review ready state or what. So I'd like some clarification on that too.
Grace first and then Leo.
This is an action item from the last retro. I've gone ahead and removed the word soft and any reference to soft deadlines from release documentations. So as far as I'm concerned, going forward, PRR soft deadlines do not exist anymore.
I think that there's still the PRR freeze, and I don't know if it's clear to everybody what state the CAPs should need to be in by that time in order to be opted into the release. Like with the enhancements freeze, we have a strict set of criteria that we like list people. It's like, you must have the cap.yaml be updated with the current milestone. You must have the latest template. You must have the cap be implementable, and all of that. But for the PRR freeze, I just feel like there's not like a checklist to go off of.
I think I added this to the documentation, but essentially the only risk is that if you submit it post PRR freeze, but you are at risk of it not being reviewed by the PRR team.
Yeah, that's a pretty small team with like a finite amount of bandwidth.
Mhm.
And I think there's definitely a risk of it not being reviewed. Leo and then James.
Maybe like a general comment about the soft deadlines. So I think in the handbooks, it does not, it makes sense to have like some sort of orientation mark. So you should like almost have, for example, all the PRs like reviewed or something, but transporting this information to the community and saying this is now a deadline. And at the end, it's a soft deadline. That this does not make sense. So maybe we can leave like some orientation mark. So people maybe like in the team reach out again or something. Makes sense, but yeah.
I was gonna say I think I muddied the waters there with a bit of the PRR thing. I think my comment, but what I actually wanted to point out was that the PRR stuff is like different, and if we're going through removing or set deadlines, we shouldn't remove the PRR one without first talking to the PRR team. That was what I was trying to get at. I think I just confused everyone. Sorry.
I was actually thinking that we should make it more strict, not remove the soft deadline, but make it a hard deadline with potentially that criteria. But if Grace said that they've done that, I'll just need to follow up.
So for my part, I just to say that I think that one easy fix for this main concern that I raised is to update the comms handbook, just mentioning that well, the situation tends to be like this. A lot of the opt-ins happen very close to the deadline, and it is what it is, and that's fine. So and I agree that just adding more deadlines only makes things worse and doesn't solve anything. Also for comms, I would say that most of even the hard deadlines can be seen as a bit on the soft side, since ultimately they are a bit on it's the criteria of the comms lead, if the thing goes in or not. We have one blog that was not ready at the placeholder time, and we are now publishing it. So it's not like other processes in here which are really hard. So I think it's fine.
Okay, in the interest of time, let's move on to the next one. And if there's any more follow-up on this, we can handle it in the next retro. James, do you want to say anything real quickly before we move on? You have your hand up still.
No, sorry, I forgot to lower it.
Okay, cool. Next one was Leo. I feel like the bug triage team is a bit light on work. At the same time, other teams are quite busy. Maybe we can distribute the work better. Do you want to discuss that?
Yes. So probably like from cycle to cycle, this is a little bit different. Obviously, maybe there are like some like crazy issues, and then one team is very busy, and then the next cycle it's not the case. But I think like overall, I observed more or less right. The bug triage team is a little light on work, and especially the CI signal team is not at least at the end. So probably like there is like some option to collaborate between the teams, or maybe also distribute the work better. So basically the idea is if CI signal opens up an issue, bug triage could follow up this issue. So if there's like a failing job or something, the bug triage team could add it to their tracking and follow up on that and ping people and make sure this is getting resolved. So there's like some overlap maybe, but
do you think that it would be beneficial long-term to combine those teams rather than have separate bug triage and CI signal teams? Or is there enough distinct work between them that it makes sense to continue them?
So maybe Heber can also say something about this, how it was how much work it was before we had this automation in place, and also the project board. I feel like it's possible to combine both teams, but at the end, it's also like an onboarding program in general. So there's like a wider footprint of the release team. So I don't know if we want to shrinking the team in that sense. So this would be more a question to the SIG release leads, I guess, if that's an option.
So I would suggest, I mean, if we're thinking about this, let's make a plan. Kind of run through the handbooks and see where the overlap is, and see if we can we can thin out some of the responsibilities, or spread them out. We have done this in the past. The test info role, Catherine was the test info lead for, I don't remember what cycle at this point, but it was pre 120, and basically said, I'm going to delete this role, and wrote enough automation issues. So like it's not out of the realm of possibility. We've also moved the this is many moons ago at this point, moved the patch release lead and the branch manager out of the release team, and that was basically the basis. Those folks were the basis for the formation of the release engineering subproject, right? So where it's possible to optimize it, it's definitely something that we strive for. I do think that because the automation is new, because the responsibilities are kind of like reshuffling, I would give it at least a cycle. And as long as we have a plan in place, I think I'd be fine with deleting a role. I don't think the value of having more people on the release team is not really realized if we're going to not have them do anything.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Heba, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, just to follow up Leo's suggestion, thank you so much for that. I've been bug triage 2 release ago, and yes, the work is getting really like, you know, like nothing once you have this automation for updating the GitHub project. So I'd say we can just, you know, like think about maybe the urgent, maybe not the urgent, but the release blocker issues need someone to just follow up with the owners or with the authors or the reviewers. But other than that, the release lead can just see these status for all the PRs, all the issues from the GitHub. So I think it would be like wiser to have the bug triage team helping with other roles as well, because I think you know, like the beneficial from having this role right now is getting you know, like it's getting, you know, like not what we are, you know, like seeking for, to have, you know, like more people knowing the process and being part of the release process.
Okay, to summarize, I think we just to keep us moving on time, we can take a look at the overlap between the roles and identify maybe after 127 if it makes sense to collapse them or change anything about what they're doing. We don't want to have, it doesn't provide value for folks to be on the release team if they're not doing specific things in learning. So we don't want to have the role just to have the role. So we should make an action item to review both handbooks together, maybe with previous role leads, and identify what we want to do post 127. Does that sound like a good takeaway?
Yeah, just to clarify, we want to be doing this during 127.
Yeah,
to make sure that we are ready to go. Yeah.
So that we can change in 128 if needed.
Yeah.
Okay, so does anybody want to take an action to own that one?
I can own this one.
Okay, that sounds good to me. All right, next one, and we've got just like 7 minutes or so left. So we probably need to pick up things in the next retro for what we'll do differently. But the last one is the docs ready. Excuse me. The docs ready for reviewers deadline shortly after code freeze is not really a deadline right now. So this is another variation on the theme of deadlines. Should we enforce this deadline in some other way? Leo, do you want to?
Right. So, I mean, we kind of discussed this already, that we don't want to have soft deadlines. And I think, I mean, I guess this, or I expect, I mean, folks can say something about it, but I think that's an important deadline, because otherwise, I mean, everybody's like super, it's very stressful to chase the docs, and we should enforce this like at some point, maybe a little later, maybe a little earlier. So perhaps it would be good to follow up on this on an issue. So I could open up an issue so we can discuss it, how to enforce it.
Okay, that sounds like a good next step for this one. Okay, any other questions on that one before we move on? We've got 5 minutes left. We can probably get to the first thing in what we'll do differently, and that one's going to be Mark, if we don't have any more discussion on that last item. Okay, so Leo will open an issue for the previous thing. Mark, do you want to discuss tracked yes for enhancement issues?
This was something that got brought up in the middle of the 126 release. I believe what had happened was when after the enhancements freeze, when the enhancements were getting cut from the release that didn't meet all of the criteria, the label tracked yes was switched to tracked no, kind of as per the usual how enhancements were tracked. And then the enhancements were also removed from the enhancement board. And then I think Jordan was just a little bit confused about what the process was. So this, I think there's a slight discussion said, hey, let's add it to the release retro to see what to do with that. I think what we settled on for the 126 release was we left them on the enhancement board, but on the main view, we added a filter that you could remove so that only the enhancements that were tracked, that had the label tracked yes would show up on the board, but you could remove that to see all of the enhancements that were opted into, and that was to not clutter the view for the enhancements team. I don't know if anybody has any suggestions about that. It seems like we're starting to get into kind of an interesting place where we're tracking more information about the enhancements on columns on the board, but not everybody like that. That's not that the who has access to flip those column fields is a smaller set than who has access to set the labels and all of that. So I didn't put much thought into this past what was kind of discussed in Slack, but I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts on how the tracked yes and tracked no labels should be used moving forward. I know that's part of that was the next step for me for updating the role handbook, was to document that and figure that out. Leo?
I think this is like a little bit, I mean, we use this project board now for the first time this cycle. So this is kind of, I guess, expected that there's like some hiccups or some like small problems or something. Like, especially around this time, Jordan wrote this message. There was, I think it was after code freeze, something we archived a lot of like action items by mistake. We unarchived them again. So there's like some getting used to working with the project board. I think how we did it now is fine. I'm okay with that. So.
Okay. Yeah, I think that keeping them on the board, but adding filters to remove the ones that are not actively being tracked is probably the best path forward here. Federico?
Yes, very quickly about this. I think that the boards are amazing, but linked with this, I think it would be very interesting for everyone in every different team to actually look into the boards collectively and try to find a consistent way to actually track and add the necessary information so that it works for everyone. I know that for comms, we created something that inherited the tracking then in enhancements and added more. If we could then see how this works with, for example, passing the information to SIGDocs or others, I think that we tried things the first time in this version. In the next one, it perhaps would be a good idea to have a more global view on the boards and on the needs of every specific team, so that we don't create things apart from, for example, identical fields that can be reused and make things more complex than they need to be.
Yeah, I think when we started the 126 release, we had a very small amount of columns, and then it just kind of grew organically to add all of the PRR columns and then the docs and comms columns. So I agree, we probably should reevaluate that and maybe make a little bit more of a like intentional effort around what columns are on the board at some point.
So I think we also have these are automated, right? In some way, shape, or form, or is it strictly manual configuration?
For creating the columns or for updating
The board
column?
configuration itself.
It's manual right now. I have an open issue in the GitHub project board's feedback about having a way to automate this with a couple of suggestions, either having like a template or the GraphQL queries. There's no mutations for adding columns right now, unfortunately.
Gotcha. Because
And
what I was going to
that's-
say is you have a configuration per team and have those munged to create create each of the filters for the board.
Yeah.
And then you can delegate owners to those configurations too.
Mhm.
All right, we have hit the top of the hour, which is our allotted time for today. If we have any more discussion on this one, it seems like we've got a couple of good things to follow up on, revisiting it.
I'm learning how to choose the right audio apps for you. Which one do you want to use to listen to this?
Oh man, Siri's going crazy on my watch. Sounds like we have a couple of things to take a look at. Jeez. Oh, that was great. Yeah, I have no idea how that just happened. Started playing Beck. That's great. Okay, so a couple things to take away from this one. We need to look at what's the right thing to have on the board. I think there was a follow-up item from Grace later on. When's a good time to wipe the enhancement board? What signals do we need from that? So maybe we can take a look at that too, as we think about the life cycle of the boards. We can pick that up in part 3 of the retro. I think we'll have to schedule that for tomorrow. There's a few things left here and then quite a few things in the parking lot. So we either have retro part 3 or we can take some of these things asynchronously. I'll leave that to James and Nabarun to kind of figure out for following up for the release. With that said, I hope everybody has a great day, great rest of your evening, day, whatever time it might be for you. And thanks so much for your feedback and participation in this retro. And we will stop the recording there and pick it up for part 3, however that's going to unfold. Stay tuned for some comms and probably in SIG release on what that'll look like. All right, thanks everybody.
Everyone.